called stigmatized knowledge. And the idea is these kind of claims are basically saying they're keeping it secret from you or something like that. There's some reason why people aren't talking about it. Yeah, it's forgotten knowledge. There's different kinds of it as well. And it sounds logical because you're hearing this and you're like, oh yeah, you know, I don't like politicians, and so therefore archaeology is funded by politics, so therefore da-da-da-da-da. And there's like this progression of logic that sort of people get, you know, enamored in. But yeah, you need to be able to step back and say, you know, that really just does not make sense. It's like this new thing about olive trees being planted on Göbekli Tepe, and it's like, dude, almost every single site in the Mediterranean has olive trees planted on it. Wait, that's just how it is. We find sites in the middle of olive groves. Farmers plant olive trees. I've had to dig around olive trees. I've had to cut roots and deal with it. That's normal.
What is the... I haven't looked into... The whole olive tree thing kind of came up in like the last little bit of my vacation and me coming down here, so I haven't actually like... I don't really know anything about it yet. What is the deal with that? Is it that like they're planting olive trees to prevent sites from being like, I don't know what the conspiracy is.
The conspiracy is that it started in June, and that they want to not excavate Göbekli Tepe because they want to hide our prehistory from us.
Of course,
is the argument.
And that's like the really old, fancy
with
one
the
that
T-pillars and like
Where's that again?
Huh?
Is this in Turkey?
This is in Turkey.
Turkey, yeah.
Okay.
And so the idea is that they planted the olive trees on it, and they're not excavating it. In fact, they talk about how it's only 5% excavated, and there's no plans to excavate the whole site in our lifetime, and parts of it have been reburied, and they're doing all this to hide stuff from us. And it's just like...
Not just to let technology
wait
get
a
better.
second, dudes. A, those olive trees were planted by the farmer who owned the land because he knew that the land was going to be expropriated by the Turkish government, and if it's land with olive trees on it, it means more money. So, all right, that's a logical thing. And to be honest, that happens all the time with archaeology. People know they have to sell their land. They try to do something to make it classified as a different kind of land so that it's worth more. Because in a lot of countries, the government has to buy the land before you can excavate. And if you're a foreign project, you need to raise the money to buy the land, give it to the government so that you can then get permission to excavate it. This is really common all over the Mediterranean world, right? And so that's the first bit. That's why the olive trees are there.
Oh God, there's more? Jesus Christ.
They claim that it's being reburied. But look, most sites I've worked on, not every single one, most sites you excavate and you rebury after you're done excavating. It's called backfilling. And the reason why is as soon as you excavate something and expose it to the environment, it starts deteriorating. So if you don't have $1 million budget to actually conserve it and present it and manage it for indefinitely, because that's what it takes is indefinite management, then the only way to preserve what you just excavated is to rebury it. Because otherwise that site's going to be gone in 50 years. And I've gone to sites that were excavated, 100 years ago, and what you do is you try to look for the site. It's just gone. Oof. Completely disappeared because nobody bothered to backfill it or rebury it or conserve it. And so there's no like conspiracy here. And by the way, they're excavating right now, right this moment at Göbekli Tepe.
What?
It's just that the excavation season had not started yet that early in the summer. They're literally excavating. On my YouTube, I interviewed the director of the project so that we could address some of these claims and actually, talk about all the new cool finds that they have. And it's just like this idea, we don't want to excavate. We want to hide this stuff. No, we're there giving away our information for free on YouTube, sharing this stuff for as far and wide as we can and explaining this stuff. And yeah, but this conspiracy is still going.
That is crazy.
I feel like, I'm not sure if it's maybe like our like penchant for the individual like narrative, but it feels like a lot of people are very averse to the concept of standing on the shoulders of giants. Like I remember like when I was developing my undergrad thesis or whatever, and I was like that like very silly young like research girl who was like, I'm gonna like make this like crazy research study, and my prof was like, actually do a lit review, see what's interesting, and change like 2 factors. And then go from there, right? Which is what I did. And then I got an excellent thesis out of it, right? That like led to a whole bunch of other really, really cool opportunities. But the issue is like, it feels like people are so often like, they want to be like the anime protagonist character that digs deep and everything is just about them. And they like kind of like change the whole world.
Single-handedly, yeah.
That just doesn't really like happen. There are like these like great figures in history that do kind of like change the world. A lot of times they're mythologized. Even like modern historical figures get mythologized to some degree. But also even those characters and individuals, they're still standing on the shoulders of giants. They still like wouldn't, like, you know, Alexander the Great wouldn't have existed if he didn't have like all of the other nameless people that we don't really know about supporting him, tutoring him, educating him, supporting him.
And they're all named, actually. Aristotle was his tutor.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
like,
there you go.
we know his generals and stuff like that. We actually know that kind of stuff. And yeah, if you want to accomplish something really valuable for society, if you want to accomplish something really valuable for society, you need to work within society to do that. It's about that teamwork in a sense, right?
Exactly.
And it's about managing that team.
If that's the case, how do you explain what Tony Stark built in the cave with just a box of scraps? Just a box of scraps.
Damn.
You got me, man.
You touched on this earlier. I had a history PhD email me this a long time ago, so I'm curious what your thoughts are on history being written by the victors. What do you think about that statement?
Wow. I mean, I think in a general sense, I think I agree with it. I don't think I've really ever sat down to like analyze it, as it seems like we're about to right now. So I don't know. I'm going to let Flint kick this one off. I haven't really thought about it beyond
I have
that.
actually a really good example of that. So to a certain degree, archaeology is also written by the victors. Most of what we find and is visible in the archaeological record is the stuff of the elites, their monumental tombs, their palaces. That's so much easier to find than some little tiny farmhouse, right? And so the victors are far more visible, and they're far more represented in the archaeological record, in what's in museums, in what's we write about. And like I said yesterday, we're actually trying to find a way to push back against that. That's why people are studying animal bones. That's why we study sediments. That's why we're trying to look at sort of ordinary people, this subaltern approach. But a really good example of how that impacts the field and leads us sometimes in a wrong direction is with the topic of Roman slavery. So in the Roman period, you know, they had a lot of slaves, right? There were a lot of enslaved people that were conquered or born into slavery and subjugated or whatever, and it was a real part of their society. But their slavery in the Roman period is a lot different from slavery in the 19th century America, right? So at the same time, a lot of enslaved people were freed. They were granted freedom by their owners if they did a good job for a long time, or maybe when it was really common when the slaveholder died, in their will they would grant freedom to a large number of their slaves, and so it's called manumission. And this is really, really visible in the archaeological record because all these manumitted slaves, they were really proud of it, and it's on their tombstone. If they direct sort of monuments to it, it would be recorded in text and stuff like that. But the people who aren't recorded are the people who are not manumitted. And so there's this perspective that really pervaded in the study of Roman history for a long time, that slavery there was not as bad because a lot of people were freed. But the thing is we have such a biased picture of it because what we see is all these inscriptions and tombs and gravestones and things like that of the people that are freed. The people that were not freed, the only time we see them is, like, for example, in Pompeii, where they all died and they're still shackled up in their farmhouse. And we see that when we excavate that farmhouse outside of Pompeii because it was buried in ash. And so, you know, the poor enslaved people who remained enslaved, they're lost to history in a way that the freed people were not. And so now we're coming to grips with that and saying, wow, Roman slavery really was not that good. It fucking sucked. We now understand how abused these people were who were enslaved, if you see what I mean. And it all has to do with the way that history gets recorded and brought down to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
You took it in a slightly different way in terms of the type of history that's available, but I think in a roundabout way, maybe you agree with the emailer. He hated that perspective that history was written by the victors, and his point was history is written by historians. That at least in democracies, that it's not the case that like just a leader will say this is what happened historically. It's the establishment of historians engaged in historiography and historical practice that decide ultimately like what gets recorded and what you know, like how the interpretations and everything are done. And that phrase of history is written by the victors, he hated it because I guess it gave the impression that you know, well, since we won these wars, now everything that we say is forever tainted and biased, and it's incapable of ever like portraying anything in reality.
I think that's kind of just boiling it down a little bit more to the sum of its parts, though, where it's like, yeah, of course, history is written by historians, but those historians are the victors. Like, they're the historians of whoever pervaded and whoever kind of came out on top, you know?
Sure, but I think it's trying to separate out the idea that when you say history is written by the victors, the impression that's brought to mind is that the goal then is to just make your society or culture look as good as possible
at
the detriment of anything else that exists beforehand.
I don't know if that's always a conscious goal, but it certainly can be an unconscious one.
It can be, for sure,
And here's an example of a loser writing history is Polybius. He's the one who wrote about the wars between Rome and Carthage, right? And he was actually an enslaved Greek who was enslaved due to the fact that his city-state lost in war to Rome. But he became kind of this kiss-up historian who kissed up to the Romans and everything like that and recorded them as being glorious and great. And so, you know, it's sort of like, look, everything that's written down, even what's not written down, our material culture that we have, is all very biased. And we need to pick apart those kind of contexts and biases anyway. And so I think it's not just a cut and dry victors, losers. Sure. It's just recognizing the biases that are there and trying to understand them. Yeah.